Committee is back on. The time now is 5:02 p.m. We'll now move on in the agenda. Next item is Bill 60-34. This is introduced by Senator Fernando Esteves and Senator Tommy Morrison. This is this is to amend certain sections of the code and to repeal Chapter 20, Title 17, Guam Code Annotated relative to the Citizens Legislature Act. I want to ask Mr. Ken Leon Guerrero, Mr. Darrell Taggarty, and Senator Mike Limtiaco. Can please
Going 61 first or
60. This is Bill 60. And I'll recognize the prime sponsor of the legislation, Senator Esteves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What Bill 60 aims to do is to allow more flexibility to have more people avail themselves to participate in the government process. Oftentimes, the word special interest is used with such a negative connotation. However, we should realize that it's important that a nurse who advocates for healthcare is advocating for special interests, but with a positive interest to what they want to do, or a teacher who advocates for education, businessman advocating for business. The legislature and our government, the very foundation of the democratic society in the United States, was based off of a legislature, was based off, in true democracy, the butcher, baker, and candlestick maker. And I stand by that. And allowing them to be able to do this and to give their opinions and voices and ideas to take part in government, I think is essential to moving forward. In Guam alone, when you look, it just becomes a statistical necessity when you look at the size of the population. Now, when you start to take the total population and dwindle down those that qualify and those do not qualify, you start seeing that limits the pool of potential candidates. Furthermore, if you start applying other qualification matters, such as whether or not they're classified or unclassified, then that can potentially dwindle it down. Now, while that's not the subject matter of today, Mr. Chairman, the main focus of this bill is to change and does two major things. It turns us into a part-time legislature. And what this does is it allows somebody who's put in 15, 20 years into the federal system, 15 to 20 years in the local government system, and to allow our best and brightest who have built their lives and careers on specific aspects of expertise that would benefit everyone, to allow them to serve the people of Guam without saying, I'm going to drop everything I've worked for 10 years, for 15 years, for 20 years, and allow them to serve and give that their best ability, skills, knowledge, and ideas, and lend that to the people of Guam for the benefit of everyone. So again, I'd like to thank the people who came up today to testify, and I'd like to continue to ask my colleagues for support in this endeavor.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Bill 61, first off, we thank you for having both measures heard today. It was our attempt in the first go-around to have both measures heard. With that in mind, in the interest of time, that if we could have testimony, if the panel doesn't mind that the testimony be also used for both measures for Bill 60 and 61. They're both similar, except Bill 61 calls for a binding referendum, the 28th general election. So I'm just wondering, instead we have to go around this, they're similar.
Yes, Senator, we'll go ahead and allow testimony on both, so we'll allow you to give an opening on Bill 61 as well now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Esteves and I appreciate the testimonies that were submitted during what was the initial public hearing on Bill 60, which were all in favor of opening the doors for our working families to participate in the policy-making process and to redirect the legislature's focus to its primary duties, which are to approve a government budget, consider executive appointments, and propose new legislation. Mr. Chairman, we thank you and the committee and those in the community who are helping to move this conversation forward, despite there being what we believe is a serious effort by a few but powerful forces in our political system who want to protect the status quo. The idea of changing what we have now to a true citizens legislature representative of the Guamanians from diverse backgrounds, professions, and experiences has been a proposal brought up many times in the past, certainly as a discussion topic. In the case of the 28th Guam legislatures, the suggestion was formally introduced by Senator Klitsky as Bill 290 in April of 2006. More than 10 years later, the Citizens Legislature proposal remains just that, an idea. With Bills 60 and 61, Senator Estevez and I have offered two options to finally move this issue forward. If senators are finding it extremely difficult to decide on this issue for themselves, then the solution is to hand over this important responsibility to the voters of Guam. Mr. Chair, I think you've been around long as well in this legislature, going through the campaign trail and participating in many forums. There's never a moment or a time that we've shown up to forums, debates, different discussions that this topic of our thoughts and what we believe or what's our position on with a part-time legislature. And with many attempts, even with Senator Lemtiaco, who has raised the discussion during his tenure in the legislature, and those efforts. So, Mr. Chair, I certainly believe that it's time that, that we find a way to bring closure to this issue, knowing that our people have brought it up many times. There's efforts in the past I've raised in my testimony by members of this body that have made attempts. I think for us to leave this issue lingering, and even if Bill 60 takes it to the floor and we can't get our heads around to move it forward, I believe 61 is the answer to finally bring closure to this issue by putting before our people. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Morrison. I'd like to call on Mr. John Carlix. You can also join the panel up front. I will now open it up for testimony. Senator?
Thank you so much, Vice Speaker Terlahi, Committee Chairman Rodriguez, Honorable Senators. Thank you for the opportunity to submit testimony today. It's my first time in the Legislative Hall since I was a senator, and if you see Senator Rodriguez, let him know that, Senator Respicio, let him know that I apologize for arguing with him about rebuilding this building. When I ran for senator in the 32nd Guam Legislature, part of my platform was a citizens legislature, a part-time legislature, and during that 32nd legislature, I came to many of you before and tried to garner support about it. And I know it's a very difficult decision topic to make, but I'm glad that it was introduced, and I'm here to testify in support of both Bill 60 and 61. I've always been of the opinion that being a senator is a very difficult position to hold. Being in your shoes at one point in time, I understand the tough decisions you have to make, and it's not the decisions that you have to make are so tough that sometimes having this as a career is a very difficult position to have. And I think that with a part-time legislature, it may free you up to make some very tough decisions that other legislatures that precede you have to continue to make over decades of time just to get us back to where, especially from a fiscal standpoint, where we need to be to address some of the shortcomings for funding of our agencies, Department of Education, the Fire Department, Police Department, etc. The list can go on, but when you look at the grand scheme of the legislature's budget, it's just a small fraction of the total government operating budget, right? So I don't want to put too much emphasis on the finances and how much you'd save, because really it's not that significant. However, with your current budget talks and a lot of what I see in the news, there's no shortage of agencies that could use $500,000 here or $1 million there. And so it would free up some money. But I think the more important part for me is that if we can move away from the full-time legislature and into a part-time legislature, it opens up the ability for other people in the community It widens the pool of candidates that potentially could do this as a part-time job as opposed to the commitments of a full-time one while keeping their current position or their current employment. And I think Bill 60 addresses that. It also addresses not only for those that are employed in the private sector, it also addresses those that are employed by the government of Guam as well. I think it addresses some issues that could come up with conflicts of interest, and I think it probably, with the input from the rest of the senators, that the bill can be scrubbed and made better. And I believe that that the part-time legislature also will really bring a lot more of that pool of people with certain specific interests. For example, you, Senator Rodriguez, on your, I know you've been very passionate about healthcare, and having more people support and promote healthcare would be a benefit to you, as a sitting senator as well, right? To help you support your cause. But what I'm really here to testify on for both of these bills is that, one, I want to commend Senator Estevez and Senator Morrison for having the courage to introduce something that is, politically, it's a political football. Two, I want to thank the committee chairman for giving its due process and letting it go through the motions of having a public hearing. I want to thank the Committee on Rules in advance for bringing it to the floor. But mostly I want to thank all of the senators for giving it its time to be debated, both the positives and the negatives of the part-time legislature, to vet out whether this could be a good idea or couldn't be a good idea. And I think that's the one thing that I miss the most about being a senator, is that you own that process. You have the ability to get all of the input from all the sitting senators and either pass the bill or not pass the bill. And I think that's the one thing that I'm proud of Senator Estevez and Morrison for doing, and for the committee chairman and the Committee on Rules, is let's get it through the process. Let's have the discussion. Let's educate the public. Let them watch and take those debates that for both the strengths and the weaknesses that each of the senators bring to the table, and also educate our public on the benefits and the weaknesses of a part-time legislature. I think that will also aid in your bill, Senator Morrison, 61, that if it does come to that, then the public will be more educated for it and can really evaluate Attachment A and see whether or not it's something that they want their leaders to pursue. So thank you very much for the opportunity to provide testimony, and once again, good job.
Thank you very much, Senator Ntiaco. Mr. Leon Guerrero.
I would like to start with Daryl Borja Taggarty's testimony first. On Bill 60, Mr. Chairman, thank you for soliciting the viewpoint of the public regarding Bill 6034. And I thank Senator Fernando B. Estevez for proposing the Citizens Legislature Act. I am concerned that this bill does not accomplish its purpose and purported intent as written. There is no need for a law to reform the legislative branch unless substantive institutional change is the direct result of its design and text. This is not the time for polite or suggestive language. If anything should be insinuated by this Legislative Reform Act, it would be to cut the incumbent perks at taxpayer expense and impose time limits to better focus your attention on our common priorities. In Sections 2 and 3, senators' pre-existing employment is protected and official salaries are replaced by stipends and a per diem formula payments. In Sections 4 and 5, the legislature is allowed to organize itself. Nowhere in this bill is a clear statement of legislative intent to restrict session length to part-time equivalency. Reducing official working days is merely implied, not stated as policy. Section 6 authorizes classified staff, which I support, but fails to clearly express a policy to reduce senators' personal staff levels in order to man the Office of Legislative Research. Section 7. I am certain that working models and guidance in these areas are available from the Western Legislative Conference. So much is made in this bill on the eligibility of government in Guam executive branch employees for legislative office. I have misgivings about this. Over the decades, the rank and file of government in Guam has been a special interest voter bloc on its own. The legislature has approved pay raises without measuring productivity. More often than not, senators ignore or tiptoe through their oversight responsibility so as not to offend agency employees. The general public is ill-served by this relationship, which may well be perverse if classified employees could elect their own representatives. Therefore, I urge you to rethink allowing any government employees to seek or hold legislative office. I wholeheartedly support the establishment of a central research staff under the Legislative Council subject to confidentiality in a manner similar to congressional staff, questioning of witnesses, fact-finding investigations and hearings that can be scheduled and conducted by the staff without the drama or grandstanding. Senators can attend in person or avail themselves to the online broadcast, video on demand, briefings, and digest. Again, design and procedural experience is available through the Western Legislative Conference. Bill number 60-34 needs stronger language to articulate and achieve its apparent intent. With clearer statements of intended policy, I would support its passage. Who am I to advise you on this? For those of you who may not know, I served 5 different senators as a policy analyst over the past 30 years. I have also worked for 2 congressional delegates and 3 different administrations in various capacities. I have seen what works, what doesn't, and why. It is not in the public interest for you, our elected officials, to drag your feet and enjoy your incumbency when you are elected to lead us confidently into a better future, 2-year term by 2-year term. Please append my testimony on this bill to my comments on Bill 6134 and Bill 9234, which were heard today. Thank you for considering my perspectives on this important bill. And on Bill 6134, yes, short testimony. Mr. Chairman, thank you for soliciting the viewpoint of the public regarding Bill number 6134. I thank Senator Tommy Morrison for proposing the proposed Citizens Legislature Act directly to the voters. It appears that Senators Morrison and Estevez are not optimistic that our current elected leaders have the will or ability to publicly debate and vote on Bill 6034. Bill number 6134 provides a means by which our current elected leaders can avoid doing their job. I am more optimistic than that. I do not think Bill 6134 to be necessary if a majority of the current senators from both parties will represent the public interest on Bill 6034. Also, if Bill number 6034 were to merit support after public debate, it should be passed by veto-proof majority to take reorganization of the legislative branch out of the hands of the governor. The popular referendum contained in Bill 6134 should be enacted if the Citizens Legislature Act does not find sufficient support within the current membership of the legislature. Senators, please do your job and publicly debate Bill number 6034 in the legislative session. Let us see for ourselves the quality of your representation. We elected you to consider policies to advance this community and make decisions. If you cannot, then please pass Bill 6134, and we, the voters, will make the hard decision for you. Your handling of this and other matters reflects the quality of your representation, to which we will base our advocacy for votes in 2018. Darrell Borja Taggarty. Now, I'm Ken Leon Guerrero, the spokesperson for Guam Citizens of Public Accountability, And we oppose bills both 60 and 6134 because they are designed to fail. They are unrealistic and they're in their own way. They do not create a part-time legislature, since both bills include the wording, Section 1118, Sessions of the Guam Legislature. A, the legislature shall convene in a new regular session at the seat of government at 10 a.m. on the first Monday of January of each year. The regular session shall continue for such period as each legislature may determine. With this wording, senators can go ahead and keep the session length to whatever they want it to be, even back to full time for compensation purposes. The language in Bills 60 and 61 in no way, shape, or form meets the public expectations for a part-time legislature. And there is a reason why the public favors a part-time legislature, outside of the fact that 41 of the 50 states have part-time legislatures. The 34th legislature is on track to surpass performance records set by the 33rd legislature, which introduced a total of 411 bills and 513 resolutions in 24 months by introducing 177 bills, 225 resolutions in just 8 months. At the current rate, the 34th is on track to introduce 531 bills and 675 resolutions. Parkinson's law states stuff will accumulate to fill the amount of space allocated. And after looking at the quality of bills and resolutions introduced, the Parkinson law definitely applies to the Guam legislature, which is why voters and taxpayers believe that we will get better results from a part-time legislature. So we propose the bill's authors consider replacing essential operational points of Bills 60 and 61 with the essential operating points from the draft outline our committee is working on to create the voters' initiative we call the Legislative Reform Act of 2018, to address the concerns that we as citizens have concerning making the legislature a true house of the people, starting with sessions. The legislature will meet twice a year for 30 working day sessions, on the first Monday in January and the first Monday in August, to enact legislation, approve budgets, confirm executive appointments, and other duties as prescribed to the senators. The governor and the speaker shall have the power to call the legislature in for special sessions at his or her discretion. 1. Special sessions shall not entertain any other legislation beyond the single piece of legislation listed for the special session. 2. Special sessions shall terminate at the end of 10 workdays regardless of the outcome. During testimony on Bill 45 earlier this year, I was astounded at the amount of testimony that was focused on how to determine which party controls the legislature and how committees would be selected and how budgets would be divided. In other words, it was a disgusting display of to the victor go the spoils, and I did not see any concern for how this attitude affects the voters. So we decided that the legislators, officers, and committee assignments should be decided by the voters. Committees. Committee chairs will be selected based on the number of votes received in the election. The senator with the highest vote total shall be the speaker and have first pick on committees. In the event he or she declines to be speaker, the position will be offered to the senator with the second highest vote, and so on for each office. The senator with the second highest vote total shall be vice speaker and have her second, and she shall have the second pick of committee chairs. The senator with the third highest vote total will be the legislative secretary and have third pick of committee chairs, and so on, and in descending order of vote totals until all committee chairs have been selected. No senator may serve as chairman on 2 committees. The vice chairman of each committee shall be determined by the committee member senator with the highest number of votes. Committee membership shall be determined in the same manner as committee chairs until such time as each committee has a minimum of 5 members. In this manner of office selection and committee assignments decided by voters based on voter totals as opposed to the traditional political party spoils of war approach. You are all elected senators to represent the voters. You're not elected to represent political parties. We citizens realize this process will require more senators to make the number of committees work. We also realize what a mistake it was reducing the number of senators down from 21 to 15, and so we rectify that mistake with number of senators. To ensure there are adequate numbers of representatives to do the people's business in a part-time work environment and staff the various legislative committees properly, it is essential that a broad selection of people representing a wide range of skills and knowledge and experience are seated in the legislature. Therefore, it becomes imperative that the number of senators representing the people be returned to 21. Now, another thing that didn't work for voters was the compensation proposed by Bills 60 and 61. Even though senators will be working part-time, they will be thinking full-time, and they will be working through their staff to create legislation during the out-of-session periods. They may hold office hours once a week, once a month, or more often, depending on the individual senator. Therefore, we need a compensation package that recognizes senators will perform some functions of their office outside of the 60-day periods and should be compensated. Now, I lived in Nevada, which meets biannually, but my senators and my representatives had offices, and my senator on Saturdays in his office, district office in Reno, he would come in between 10 o'clock and 4 o'clock on Saturdays to meet with constituents. Bear in mind, session didn't happen until every other year. But this recognizes that even though you're going to be senators and you're part-time, you're going to be thinking, you're going to be working with your staff, you're going to be directing them, guiding their efforts and stuff, and therefore that time should be compensated. So there will be an annual base compensation. The Speaker shall receive an annual base of $26,000 per annum. The annual base compensation for the Vice Speaker will be $24,000 per annum. The annual base compensation for the Legislative Secretary will be $22,000 per annum. The annual base for a Senator will be $20,000 per annum plus medical benefits. In addition to the per annum, there's the daily compensation. Senators will be compensated for each of the day the legislature is in active session. The Speaker shall receive a daily compensation of $250. The Vice Speaker shall receive a daily compensation of $240. The Legislative Secretary will receive a compensation of $230, and Senators will receive a daily compensation of $200 a day. Now, according to the National Association of State County Legislatures, NSC, whatever that acronym is, the average compensation of a state senator is $38,000 and change. But that also includes travel and lodging and meals, because in many of those senators, they're traveling great distances. So at this rate, it works out to the average compensation of a senator on Guam will be $36,000 by the time you average everybody together. The daily compensation rate shall be in effect during special sessions called by the governor or speaker. Daily compensation rates do not apply to government holidays unless the legislature is in active session. Senators are not eligible for personal leave, vacation leave, sick leave, or retirement benefits. Now, another issue that came up during the hearing on Bill 45 was the allocation of staffing and budgets. We believe this can be simplified, make the legislature more responsive to the needs of the people than the needs of empire-building professional politicians trying to make themselves more appealing to special interest campaign donors. Staffing. All legislative staff will be assigned to the central office. All staff will be permanent employees covered by civil service and compensation based on positions, salary schedules currently enforced at the Department of Administration. Number one, the executive director is a temporary position for each legislature. The executive director shall be selected by and serve at the pleasure of the speaker. The executive director shall assign central staff personnel to assist senators and their staffs as needed. Number three, the sergeant-at-arms is a temporary position for each legislature. The sergeant-at-arms shall be selected by and serve at the pleasure of the vice speaker. Number four, each senator will be allowed 2 full-time temporary hires to staff his or her office and serve as a liaison between the senator and the community. Number 5, committee staff members will be supervised by committee chairmen, but compensation will come out of the central staff budget. Office budgets. The senators will all have the same office budget for their individual operations, and that amount will be determined by the speaker at the beginning of each legislature. In addition, in summary, these are the kinds of things we were hoping to see in Bill 60 or 61, and the fact that we don't see anything close and the lack of action on passing Bill 45 tells us this legislature is incapable of seeing beyond party politics, and I hope that we're proven wrong. So in the current climate, if there's going to be positive, meaningful changes to the legislature, it appears that it's going to require a voter initiative. So I suggest you go back to the drawing board with these bills and do the right thing for the voters and people in Guam, or we will be forced to do it ourselves.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leon Guerrero. Mr. Carlos, testimony.
My name is John Carlos. I'm a retired regulator. I'm also a consumer advocate. I am not in favor of Bill 6134. I've tried to secure some information and data, knowing from the beginning that this bill comes from an idealistic position and or a possible way of increasing efficiency and accountability in the government. However, there's very sparse, very limited information. And so the only information I was able to gather is from the website of the National Conference of State Legislature, or NCSL. The very limited information classified state legislatures in the United States into green legislature, meaning the legislators are working full-time, they're well-paid, and they have large staff. And then there's the hybrid or gray legislatures. The gray legislatures fall somewhere in between the green and the gold. The gold legislature work part-time. They have very low compensation and very small staff. The information that I have gathered from the NCSL is attached to this testimony. The main concern that I have for a citizens legislator is that the compensation for a legislator will not be a living wage. It is a wage that will not be able to support a family. or the food and education of a family. So given that situation, a legislature working a part-time or citizens legislature will have no recourse but to seek employment, or if he has some special qualities or some ability, he'll become an entrepreneur and or a business owner. So a part-time legislator will be forced to work as an employee or as a business owner. There will be times when issues shall be presented before the legislature, and there is greater possibility of being exposed to conflict of interest. Some very idealistic legislators, when faced with a possible conflict of interest, will either do an abstention or refuse from taking part in the process. And that kind of destroys the whole concept of making hard decisions when the legislators are supposed to represent the desires and the aspirations of their constituents. So given those situations, at this time, I'm not in favor of part-time legislature or citizens legislature. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carlos. I ask the two authors if they have any questions or comment. I ask Senator Esteves first.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to go down the line. I'd like to thank the panel for being present today and presenting testimony. For the sake of time, I'd like to, because I know, Senator, you probably busy with respect to your former position. Now, in your experience as a prior senator, do you think that, was it your experience that there were many issues of conflicts of interest in a full, or the potential for conflicts of interest in a full-time legislature during your time as a senator?
Yes, I think that would exist whether or not it's a full-time or a part-time legislature. But you know, we have a process to go through to recuse yourself on whether, you know, it's bill introduction or how you vote, and it's a responsibility of the senator to make those conflicts known and to recuse themselves appropriately. So I don't think that would change whether it's a full-time or a part-time legislature. It'd be the same.
During your time as a senator, how many staff members did you have?
I had a part-time staff member, and I had one full-time staff as well.
And do you feel because I could speak for my current experience, is that the staff is absolutely essential to a senator's operations. I think with that, because I similarly have a small staff, do you feel that you were able to be effective in there even within a 2-year period?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I believe strongly that if you had even one very strong staff member would be sufficient. Now, of course, you know, if you have a committee and you have you hold a position of either secretary, treasurer, speaker, vice speaker, you have more responsibilities than just, you know, the those that do not. But if you don't hold those committee if you're not a chairperson for one of those committees, I would think that one very strong, experienced staffer should be sufficient.
Thank you. And one final question. I think you've heard of the testimony, and it's been brought up before about the potential of going back up to 21 senators in a part-time capacity. Do you think that's something that would be beneficial within the legislature, primarily to the people of Guam with regards to representation?
I've heard the arguments in favor of it, and you know, I've heard the arguments of the prior senators that actually, you know, voted on making it 15. I'm not sure that I've properly vetted the benefits and weaknesses of it, but it's definitely worth vetting during this process when you get it to the floor to include that as part of the discussion.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate it. Mr. Carlo, if I may, I think you had a question. Sorry, Mr. Carlos. Sorry. You had a question as to where we got some of our information and what we drew a comparative, and I really appreciate the information you've provided regarding the types of legislatures. We did as well pull information from the NCLSL website. Now, with regards to how we kind of compare it as a base model for looking at different part-time legislatures, we looked at Nebraska. Nebraska is the only other state legislature that is both unicameral and is part-time. Now, in a full-time model, the only other model that is both unicameral and full-time is the U.S. Virgin Islands. And that was a key aspect, whether the state body was going to be unicameral or bicameral, because it would establish what it is that they would be required to do. So for senators of the Guam legislature, it's both passing the budget and the fiscal responsibility, as well as vetting and passing and writing laws. So we took that into account. So Nebraska was the model that we used as a baseline for the development of our legislature, which is a unicameral, single house, part-time body. I hope that provides a little bit of information. We also there's also a provision within the law, both 60 and 61, in Bills 60 and 61, which requires disclosures. So that's actually something that doesn't exist in the current legislature and hasn't existed in the current legislature, is that senators produce and fill out a conflict of interest disclosure. We fill out financial disclosures, that's one thing, but in terms of conflict of interest disclosures, we're not required to disclose what business assets we might have or be a part of. So right now, and I think as the former senator echoed, that regardless of whether it's a full-time or part-time status, I think we can agree that a corrupt individual is going to be a corrupt individual in whatever skin you put them in. But that is something that we did take into consider with previous discussion on the bill, and whether having a job outside of the legislature would be a potential conflict of interest. So we wrote something in there to address that, and so everything is out in the open. Just as a fact, just a side note, as the ethics chair, I'm actually working on rule changes within the legislature to identify that more, to be more consistent with other state legislatures that have specific rules and guidelines within their standing rules on when they can introduce a bill, when they can introduce a bill based on potential conflict of interest. So we're looking at a couple different models and applying that within our own legislature to whether we're a full-time status or a part-time status, that we make sure that we have those checks and balances in place to prevent those types of conflicts. And then Mr. Leon Guerrero, thank you for your testimony. While I do understand, and to address your concern, while I do understand your concerns with, I believe that's what, subsection 1118, the thing to understand is that's consistent with the Organic Act. The Organic Act actually specifies the session, when the session begins. Specifying outside of that, when the Organic Act already states that the legislature makes the determination for how it's going to conduct session, we'd have to look at the germaneness before we make any alteration. I do, with regards to the testimony that you provided and Mr. Taggarty submitted to this committee, I'd like to help you explain the historical aspect of it. We looked at a couple of different, we've talked that this has been going on for a long time. And there have been many senators who have tried to have a part-time legislature. And there was one thing that was resounding through every single attempt, was that there were way too many details. And so whether it was Senator Esteves' perfect part-time legislature, idea of a part-time legislature, Senator Morrison's idea of a perfect part-time legislature, Senator Klitsky's idea of a perfect part-time legislature, Senator Libziako's perfect picture of a part-time legislature, one thing we do know is that they're going to be consistently different on the details. And so with the introduction of the bills was to start with the baseline model. Let the legislature give them the opportunity and give the new legislature, whoever that might be, an opportunity to make the changes necessary in order to function without restricting them by law. And then what we can do is, considering we're talking about changing one branch of government dramatically, actually, not, I would say too dramatically, because we're reverting, right? But to make that kind of change while also maintaining operations and the functions of this branch of government in a three-branch co-equal government, we need to ensure that we allow them the flexibility to make the changes and adjustments. I have no doubt in my mind that there's going to be people watching, and they're going to have their ideas, and that opinions are going to be generated of how things could be done better. And that's the very nature and wonderful beast of government, is that we should always be constantly struggling to improve. But I would ask, and I'm always available if you want to work with me, is that we look at this as kind of a base model. What would a simple part-time legislature look like? And then as things come up and as we address them based on operations, what works and what doesn't within this model, that we address them. I just caution against the danger of, one, applying something in statute that says you have to have session this day, when we don't know necessarily that that may be a good thing or bad thing, because there's no historic data to look at that. There's nothing to pull information from. We're just kind of throwing a random number in. As we learned in policy making, throwing randoms out there doesn't benefit anybody. I heard your concern of, actually it was a submitted testimony from Mr. Taggarty about how technically we could, as a legislature, stay in session the entire time. I would like to caution that if you just look at the numbers, if we were in session for 262 work days out of the year, that'll only equate to $36,400 based on the per diem, plus a $12,000 stipend, still comes in at $48,400. But I think we're in agreement that in reality, if the legislature were to try to pull a fast one like that, especially in 2017, that we'd have a brand new openings of 15 brand new senators come the next election cycle, and that wrong will right itself, as you've advocated about, is that the public is watching. So with regards to that argument, I understand the sentiment, but at some point, there has to be a certain level of trust and give and take that we rebuild back with the people. Handcuffing the specific branch of government that is designed to be representative of all the people, made up of very different minds, made up of individuals, and handcuffing them in such a way, because right now, without any historical data, we think it might be the right thing to do, and we want to try to have as much control, it can be a negative thing, because we actually see that often, and as a new senator, I'll say I see that quite often, having a negative impact to the people when the legislature over-legislates and puts too many handcuffs on the executive branch. We see problems. And I'll leave one example for the record, is Simon Sanchez. As a regular person coming off the street into office, I said, well, why couldn't this get done? And it's just what easy line they say, procurement, and, they keep on filing grievances with procurement and this and that. And if you go back far enough in history, you see that it's because the law, if you read it, and anybody who has any experience with procurement or contracting knows that it was just a bad bill to begin with. So what I'm trying to echo in terms of a sentiment is that when you try to take the point of trying to control too much from an outside point of view, you run the risk of strangling something from even growing and becoming. So, I humbly ask that you reconsider support for the bill. The bill, I understand all of the different ideas of what we think would work best, and I always welcome your opinions and the opinions of everybody of how we can all work together to ensure that the Citizens Legislation Act becomes a legislature that most, if not all, that we hope can all be proud of, and it's always going to be a work in progress. And that was the baseline for the development of this legislation, or of this bill, in order for us to keep kind of working at it and add our suggestions. But as you know, nothing is set in stone. Things can always be repealed and changed. So again, thank you, and if you have any comments, I'd like to pass it to my colleagues and my co-sponsor, Senator
Well,
Morrison.
if I could, I'd like to address your comments. The primary reason for a part-time legislature is to open the pool of candidates. I have been trying to recruit people to run for the legislature for 2 years. And the types of people that I've been trying to recruit, they're successful, they're smart, they have careers, they have businesses, and they can't walk away from that for 2 years. But they could walk away from it twice a year for 30 days. They have that much control. And these are the types of people that would be an asset to this institution. So by not having a part-time legislature, we're basically looking for people who want a job, who want a paycheck. That this is their fallback position. It's not necessarily the widest pool of talent running for the offices. The second reason is I go back to the 500 and the fact that we're on track for 531 bills. Now, when you consider the 33rd legislature, out of that 411 bills, I think they only passed like maybe 151 out of 411. And then the resolutions, we're on track to do almost 700 resolutions. When I was a community advocate fighting the Guam Resource Recovery Partners and the landfill in Santa Rita, there were so many times I would go to a senator's office and they were at a fundraiser, they're at a wedding, they're at a wake, you know. That was a daily occurrence. And there were times when I'd have appointments, firm appointments to meet with senators, and to get there only to be told, oh, well, you know, so-and-so died and the mass, and, you know, they won't be back until after lunch. So, and then there were times I would go to senators' offices and they would be at fundraisers. They'd have a fundraiser at a restaurant or someplace, and so they weren't available. So if we take out all the time they spend unofficially campaigning, and all the time they are actually campaigning and fundraising, there's not that much time that senators as a group are actually available for citizens. So by reducing the sessions to 2 30-day sessions, then they have 10 months that they can go to all the wakes, funerals, weddings, have all the fundraising they want, but they won't be doing it during the session time. Now, that was what attracted me to this, because I've lived in states that have part-time legislatures. I lived in Hawaii, I lived in Nevada, I lived in Arizona, and those 3 states all had part-time legislatures. So when you look at the problems those states faced and the challenges they had to deal with, it's not that much different than what we have to deal with here on Guam. So if they can be successful with a part-time legislature, as are 41 states right now, why can't we be successful? Now, your comment that we can't do that because the Organic Act says that we have to meet on this day. It doesn't say we have to meet on this day only. It doesn't, you know, it's not a procedural manual carved in stone. If that was the case, we wouldn't need you guys. Anything that comes up, all we'd have to do is say, how does this relate to the Organic Act? That's what your functions here are, is you are to look at the Organic Act as the base and then build on that for the benefit of the community. The Organic Act specifies that you have to, provide for education. Does it tell you how many days, how many hours, what the budgets are, how many schools we're supposed to have? No, it doesn't. The Organic Act says that we have to have a session. We were part-time session for many years. I don't remember when we went from part-time to full-time, but during my early years here, we were a part-time legislature. And my uncle, Frank Lujan, used to hijack me and make me come work for him to do his filing and paperwork when he was in the legislature. There weren't big staffs, but Guam has grown. The challenges we face have grown. So it's only logical that the work that you do is a lot more complicated than the work that was done in 1970, 71, or 72. So that's why, you know, I believe having the part-time, attracting high-caliber candidates to run for these positions and increase the size of the legislature to 21, and as the Bible says, many hands make like the Lord's work, you know. So, you know, going back to the 21 and with that narrow 60-day focus, you know, that would give, I think it would clear out a lot of that crap. I mean, have you looked at all of the resolutions that have been introduced?
I have, and I agree with, we're on the same page on probably 95% of it. I agree. I think in terms of representation, I believe in more representation. I'd like the record to reflect we haven't crunched the numbers. Based on our model of a stipend, and if you average 10 session days over or 12 months, so let's say if we were to go 10 days of session once a month for the full time, it would still be a low amount, around 28,000. That's if session even needs to go that long.
Well, I
Now,
agree with Mike here. This is not a cost reduction bill.
It's not.
This is a bill designed to improve the quality of the candidates that run for office. And those types of people are not looking at it as a paycheck. They are looking at coming forward and doing service to their community in such a way that they do not derail their businesses
Right.
or their professional careers.
What I'm getting to is that based on those calculations, if we were to go back up to 21 senators with the current allotment we assign per senator, based for a senatorial budget, then we would still be under. We wouldn't have to go over the current appropriation of the legislature at like 7.5, 7.8 million. So I just want the record to reflect that with this measure, going up to 21 senators, if it were to get argued on the floor, would not be an additional cost to the people of Guam than what we're paying now. That's the point I was trying to make. The only thing is that you had mentioned, Mr. Leon Guerrero, that the people you talked to that you were trying to get to run for senator agreed that they can take 2 breaks of 60 days total for session. But as a matter of fairness, you have to understand that when I write bills and policy, I'm considering everybody and all the people of Guam. Not just considering the people you may have talked to in your network of who would like only 30 days or a total of 60 days a year for session versus the person or stay-at-home mom or doctor who can maybe do 2 days, 5 days out of the month. I have to take what they view this as into consideration. That's all as a matter of fairness. So I think it's important to leave within the legislature, as the Organic Act alludes to, that the legislature, based on the current makeup of that body in developing of the standing rules, figures out on their own. Maybe we only need to meet for 30 days out of the year, and that's what the legislature decides to do. Maybe we only need to meet on weekends, right? Twice a month for 2 days. But I'm saying allowing that flexibility in the body, depending on who's in it, when you're talking about 15 or 21 individuals with different necessities, to ensure that we're putting out good public policy, I think is important. So I think that would be the only point of contention that we would have with regards to the bill. And there's a specific reason why I didn't determine when session should be, because having that flexibility depending on who's actually in the legislature in a part-time capacity and when they can meet, I think we need to allow them that flexibility within their own standing rules while keeping it a watchful eye. So just to kind of reiterate on that point.
Yeah, but that becomes a problem because how can we recruit people? Well, how long is the session? We don't know.
And that's the thing, though, is when we're
is there
talking
going to be
about
a penalty? Are we going to get moms that can only do weekends and have a doctor that can come in on Wednesdays and Saturdays? You know, if we have a period, they know when they're going and when they're approached, they know, okay, if I say yes and I win, my commitment is 30 working days twice a year.
And again, allowing them the flexibility is important. Part of the one model we used was the National Guard model. You know, you do time out of the weekend. There's nothing precluding us from having session over the weekend if that's what they were to call to. Would actually take away less time from what they were doing Monday through Friday. But allowing them that flexibility to make that determination. There's nothing precluding that 21 senators can't have session for 3 days out of the month, you know, so that way they can address concerns timely. They don't have to wait for once a year in case something does come up, but allows them that flexibility to address that piece of legislation. So again, I understand there are arguments that can go back and forth as to the reasonings why, but it's better to have something that we can verify objectively by growing into the shoes than automatically getting a large pair of shoes and now we can't go back from it without having to go through this entire process of more legislative reform. So sometimes this is, for me, when developing this legislation, and while I appreciate the input you have in the draft voter initiative that you want to do for the Ken Leon Guerrero part-time legislature, in this case, considering the implications and how big it is, less is more. And we can always add more, but it's always difficult to take away, as we've seen with experience. So with that, again, thank you for providing testimony today. I would like, just as a matter, and I understand my colleagues want, there's 2 pieces of testimony. The speakers weren't able to be here today. I'd like to read them into the record. They have them over there. They're making copies? We'll come back to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Vice Speaker, do you have some questions or comments? Oh, did you have? Okay, yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank you all for providing testimony today or providing your input. It's been very interesting. I know this is the second time, I know, for at least Bill 60, and I know we had testimony in Bill 60 of statements of support, but I think this second go around, I think you've digested Bill 60 further and see how it could be improved. I'm reading Mr. Taggarty's statements, and you know, he's optimistic that we'll be able to have this for the first time debated on the floor. As Senator Lentiaco stated, that you know, this is one of the opportunities that I think that we haven't had, and I believe that there's always timing. Timing is always an issue. Knowing the climate, knowing the surroundings of what type of colleagues are around you, and knowing that maybe a bill may not even get out of committee, and we know that. So I thank the chairman for pushing this forward and having this public hearing. I'm very optimistic that we'll have to be able to debate Bill 60 on the floor. And, you know, I'll admit, we introduced both bills at the same time by design, because we wanted to, it's our hope to get to this point. And one forces the issue, the other. I mean, as stated here in this testimony, consistent with Senator Lentiaco's, we can't act, we can't take action with a question that's always been before us. I mean, I stated earlier, unless that question dies away from the many forums that I participated in the community, that my thoughts on a part-time legislature is not brought up, then maybe we won't be addressing this today. But it's always a question out there before the candidates, and I think my colleagues can attest to that we've had to respond to many that same question throughout the years. So I thank you for reading this into the record, because this is exactly why we introduced both bills at the same time. And I'm optimistic and hoping that we'll debate this on the floor. And Mr. Leon Guerrero, I know you stated that Bill 61, you tied it in with the 60, that is designed to fail, but I think if we could get to at least the first step in Section 30 or Section 3 that calls for the question before our people, shall the Citizens Legislature Act, which restructures the Guam legislature to a part-time, be approved, yes or no? I'm not sure how that's designed to fail, and I'm hoping we can at least get to that first step.
Well, when I say it's designed to fail in the fact that it uses the same language as Bill 60, which does not create a part-time legislature.
But what I'm pointing out is this is the trigger already.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying nothing will happen if we can't cut this question before our voters. So
Well,
I know where you're coming from, and I saw the concerns that were raised before Senator Estevez, and I think he addressed many of them. But I'm just hoping that you can reconsider your position, and knowing that this is, I believe, one-shot opportunity to put this before the voters. As long as it's been taken to not been only discussed this in the community, I thank the chairman for bringing it this far.
Don't get me wrong, I'm hoping you guys succeed. And I'm hoping that you guys craft something that actually does what we are hoping it would do. But, to pass a law that changes damn near nothing, well, what was the point of going through the exercise? If we're going to pass a law to create a part-time legislature that doesn't create a part-time legislature, what's the point? How can we, as people, I think I'm going to run for office. Well, how long is the session going to be? We don't know until you get elected. So it's like buying a pig in a poke, We're asking you to run for office on a part-time basis, but you don't know how long the part-time is. You're going to have to get together with your fellow senators after you get elected and determine what a part-time legislature is. So now we have the mom that wants the weekend sessions. We have the busy executive that just wants 2 days a week. Then I'm hoping you guys come up with something that works. I really do. That's why I submitted the testimony because this is what we in the community are looking at and discussing and, trying to put together, because if we do an initiative, it's not any easier than what you guys are trying to do. And let me tell you, these conversations are as long as the conversations we've been having here, because the reason why these recommendations are thin right now is because these are the few points we've been able to build consensus on, which is not any different than what you're trying to do, but you're trying to do it with 15. I'm trying to do it with people all over the island. And so that's why I'm hoping you guys are able to craft something together that will look, smell, and walk like a part-time legislature. Because a part-time legislature opens up the possibility that many more people from all walks of life, I'm not just talking about professionals, but many more people from all walks of life would be able to become citizen legislators, which is the goal of this, because I think that the more, none of us is as smart as all of us. So the more people we have in this room talking about serious issues, then the better legislation we will craft. But then when we go back to this, stuff accumulates to fill the space occupied. So I don't want to appear to be picking on Senator Torres, but when we look at all the problems facing government in Guam, our finances, the drugs, the DOC, the millions of dollars of equipment that are sitting in people's yards somewhere, the $160,000 trailer that magically appeared, You know, when we're looking at problems like this, and then we're drafting a bill to allow people to select their middle name when they get married, you know. And when she explained the situation, it's just that when we have limited time, are we actually going to be drafting resolutions congratulating somebody on 17 years of continuous employment, you know? Or are we going to be working on ways that we can reduce the number of people on the island that don't have medical insurance? You see, it's always going to be limited resources, including the people at this table, 15 or 21. It's a small number, but those 15 or 21 are representing 160. And when I go back to my community advocate days and I'm going around from office to office and everybody's off at a wake or a fundraiser, you know, having that limited time frame for session, we know that during these times we will be able to be heard. It's just that if we craft a part-time legislature bill that doesn't create a part-time legislature, this is the same amount of effort that's going into creating a resolution congratulating somebody for 17 years of employment. That's the way I'm looking at it. I want you to succeed. You know, the analogy I use is I'm a passenger on an airplane, you guys are the pilots. I don't want you to crash, I really don't. I want you to land safely. You know, so how do we improve the quality of the legislation that comes out of this building? Well, the first thing to do is to open up the process to get as many different people in with as many different points of view and as many different experiences. In essence, I'm doing this, and I see what you guys are going through. You know, it's herding cats. But I can't remember who said it, the American form of government is the worst form of government until you consider all others. You know, we're kind of in that situation. The nice thing about our form of government, it evolves. It's not pretty, it's not painless, but it does evolve. And that's where we are right now. We are between a rock and a hard place. We have finite resources. We have escalating demands on those resources. We're losing our people. We're losing our tax base a little at a time. And at some point in time, if we don't get smarter about how we do things, there's going to be a knock on the door and there's going to be a federal control board coming in, taking away your checkbooks. Just like in Puerto Rico. I don't want to see that happen. We're not there yet, but we're damn close. I say we're damn close because, you know, the governor talks about the economic miracle. But why do friends of mine that have invoices with government of Guam not get paid? Why did a friend of mine almost have to file bankruptcy after he fired all of his employees because he hadn't gotten paid on the contract he did? That's why I'm saying we have a serious situation here. You guys are the ones that can make it better or can make it worse. The governor doesn't have the ability to write laws. He doesn't have the ability to spend money that you don't give him. You know, and you are the ones that decide who is sitting at the heads of all of our government agencies. So yes, you're a very powerful and a very necessary part of the government, but you're the part of the government that we, the people, have the most interaction with. And if you don't believe me, I can show you how many times I've left messages at Adelup that for some reason haven't been returned.
Well, I can at least tell you that every time you schedule an appointment with me, I met with you.
No, I'm saying this is the body where we, the people, have the most direct, and you guys are awesome about it. The ones that I'm referring to, for the most part, are no longer here.
Yeah, I just wanted to point it out. I make every effort to meet with the constituents to set up appointments.
No, but I know. You guys up here, I mean, Dennis and I shoot emails back and forth at each other at *100 a lot.
Yeah.
You know, and you and, I mean, I've got your cell phone number, and 99% of the time when you're not in meetings, you respond. I'm saying that we have seen in this group of senators an evolution, and I mentioned that earlier today. I want to see that evolution continue by opening up the process to more people. And that's where the part-time will help. And they just got to know. They got to know what the part-time is. We can't make it iffy.
Well, I want to thank you, Mr. Leon Guerrero. I'll certainly work with the author, the chairman of the committee, and if there's needed revisions or amendments that need to be made to Bill 60, and allowing, again, to move forward and debate it on the floor, get our colleagues' input, and make it a better bill. Certainly, I hope that could happen. With Bill 61, I still believe it's there as an opportunity to call the question before the voters and put this issue to bring some clarity going forward, so that we at least have an understanding what the people want with, we call this the people's house. What do they want with this house? Do they want it at part-time or a full-time? And I think this question needs to move forward. I do just want to make sure, Mr. Chair, that, I don't believe we're going to, we'll be getting everything right the first time. And I think bills have evolved, or certain legislative acts have evolved. I mean, to this day, even to this day, we still have to make the necessary amendments, revisions to our rules, to how we function and run this legislature. So, but I really think it's key. This is an opportunity that, again, I keep repeating myself. If we got this far, and we can get our the 34th legislature moving forward.
As I've said in my conversations to the two of you, my goal was that we would have this bill passed now, go into effect in 2020, to allow time to make the changes necessary in the mechanics and, the processes and procedures, because, this is the equivalent of turning a battleship 90 degrees at 35 knots. It doesn't happen, And that's why when I was talking to you, my vision of this would be a 2020 effective date, so that we get past the hoopla of the governor, and and we have time, because if we passed a bill now and it was part-time, and we knew that starting 2020 it's going to be part-time, it's going to be two 30-day sessions a year, then people can start making the changes on this side about doing what it takes to change their lives to run for office. And at the same time, the legislature will have time to make incremental changes necessary, as opposed to trying to make that 90-degree turn at 35 knots. Because this is a very, very complicated process. There are a lot of moving parts, and these parts need to be thought about, because every time I sit down with Bob Klitsky, and I just get a grasp of all the stuff that's involved, That's why, from the beginning, I was always talking about a 2020 time frame,
Okay, so we'll just move on. Vice Speaker, did you have any questions or comments? Or Senator Lee? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all so much for your participation today, for coming and speaking with us, and for giving us your perspective. I think it's really important, and I just, from what you were saying, Mr. Leon Guerrero, this is the branch of government where you've had the most interaction, and I think that's really key. That's really essential here, and we don't want to limit that. We want to increase that opportunity for our people to come and have their voices be heard, and whether it's in constituent meetings or giving feedback in public hearings or roundtables, we want to make sure that we're available to them and they continue to have that access to us as legislators and access to the government. And Senator Lim Tiaco, I especially want to thank you for your time and for coming. And I just want to reiterate for the record, you were mentioning that you had a part-time staffer during your work and a full-time staffer? Is that correct? Okay. And then you also alluded to the idea of committee work taking a great deal of time, and if potentially you're in a leadership position, that would also take a considerable amount of time. Is that correct?
No, it would require more staff, and I think that's addressed in the legislation with the centralized staff.
Require more staff. Okay, thank you. And Mr. Carlos, I'm really glad that
Just
you...
to be clear, it's the centralized staff, right? So there'll be that centralized staff that does
Right.
that work, not staff for the individual senators to do it.
Understood. Thank you. Mr. Carlos, I'm really glad that you, in your written testimony and your oral testimony, you had discussed the National Conference of State Legislators. And I actually had the opportunity of attending their most recent conference in Boston a few weeks ago. And I submitted a travel report documenting all of the sessions that I attended, and that is available on our website. I think I submitted it on August 25th, 2017. I stopped in on a session on legislative effectiveness. It was a lunch working session, and it was about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And it was an opportunity for elected leaders to kind of just stand up and talk about some of the challenges they had with legislative effectiveness. And to my surprise, it turned into a conversation amongst a majority of the elected officials who came from states that have part-time legislatures. And so I was fascinated by the feedback that they had to give, and some of them were elected officials and some of them were full-time staff members of these different states. And I want to say that there were representatives from Wyoming, from Nebraska, from New Jersey, Idaho, and Kansas, all kind of standing up and talking about some of the challenges that they encountered. Some of those included, as new elected leaders, they felt that they didn't have enough time or experience to be able to really do their jobs as effectively as they wanted to. They talked a little bit about some issues with conflicts of interest with their professional lives and having to recuse themselves from certain votes just because, if I'm an insurance industry professional, I'm not able to vote on certain measures that might affect my personal business. So they were, they had to recuse themselves and not participate fully in the process because of that conflict of interest. In addition to that, they talked about challenges with professional staff, that professional staff really held a lot of power and a lot of weight, and sometimes some of the elected officials weren't able to have as much access to certain professional staff as much as they would want to. So that was a real challenge. They also talked about some of the pieces of legislation that they passed that actually they had to overturn because it was unconstitutional, because they didn't have enough time to work with legal bureau and really take the time to review their measures and have a really deliberative process. And that's something that we are attempting to do every single day here in the 34th Guam Legislature. And I'm really proud of that. We take the time and attention to review the bills that are introduced and eventually make it to the floor. We have a very thorough rules process. We have a pre-referral process, even before the bills are referred to committees, to make sure that Legal Bureau has the opportunity to review it and then sit down with the senators and even the co-sponsors that author these pieces of legislation so that they can continue to make sure that they are organic, and that they're constitutional. Another issue that they brought up was in the budget process. Several elected leaders complained that they just had absolutely no opportunity for oversight. And I think that sets extremely dangerous precedent. So Mr. Carlos, I really appreciate you bringing up NCSL. I think they're a resource for us, especially kind of seeing how things are done in other states and kind of modeling things after what has been done and really learning from some of their mistakes and some of their challenges. And I think that really benefits us as a small community here on Guam to kind of see what could potentially happen in some of these, or what is happening in some of these states, but what could potentially happen here on Guam should we take these steps. And I think that it's so important that we have not less representation, but more transparency in the work that we do. And my colleague, Senator Esteves, he was mentioning in his comments that we're really struggling to improve. And I think that struggle is a full-time effort. So it really requires full-time work and full attention. I'm really sorry, Mr. Leonguero, if you feel that, some of my colleagues or even myself might not be available to you because we're at funerals or at rosaries, or I'm not sure what the other things that you mentioned, but I just know personally that this job, it's more than 24/7. I feel like I'm reading up till late into the evening to make sure that I am prepared for the next day's work. A lot of the bills that I and many of my colleagues have introduced are painstaking in the way that we try to collaborate with stakeholders before introducing the legislation. So, yeah, it's
You did hear
really
me
interesting
mention
to
that
me.
I thought that this legislature, had evolved, I mean, I see the quality of the work.
Right.
I see the quality of the effort. The references I made were about past legislators.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Past legislatures.
Okay.
But, I mean, the online, the only complaint I have about online, you just have a date. You don't have the title. It'd be so great if it said, May 31st, public hearing.
And then the subject.
And the subject,
No, I agree with you. And that's definitely something that we can work on.
Hey,
But
it's evolving. Look at this. We got this.
Yeah, and you can pull it up on YouTube at any
I can't even tell you how
time.
many times I'm sitting at home at 5 o'clock in the morning watching sessions
Right.
and things that I did. So I'm saying that the 34th legislature so far has really stepped up. But like I said earlier, this is evolving. This is an evolving process. I think we have seen a very big evolution with the 34th. I would like to, if we just go back to the bill, if we had a bill that said a part-time legislature, we had 2 years to work out the mechanics and the processes, that would give us time to really open up to get 21 quality people, and hopefully you'd all be on the list as well. But, and then we could spread the work out over more bodies. Right now you've got 15 people. How many committees are each one of you sitting on? How many chairs are you all sitting on? We need to spread that out a little bit. But I'm saying this is an evolving process.
Thank you. I also just want to close by saying that our primary role is to pass a budget, is to provide oversight for our government agencies, and to draft and pass legislation. And in addition to that, we meet with constituents and stakeholders, and we hear from them on ways that we can improve our government. And so I think, we all take that very seriously, and I really do think that that's a full-time job. And Mr. Chair, if possible, if we could just include the travel report from NCSL into the committee report for this bill, I'd appreciate it. And I thank you again all for your time.
Mr. Chair, real quick, just a comment on that. And this is exactly what I was referring to in my testimony, is that get it to the floor. Get it out of committee. Get it on the floor, and let Senator Bisco and all the remaining senators debate it and talk about the strengths, talk about the weaknesses, and see where it ends up. But it needs to have its day on the floor. Thank you.
I agree. Thank you, Senator. Vice Speaker?
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank all of you for coming. And I've heard your testimony, and this bill is very important to me because it really, I was surprised at its introduction because for me, it really struck at the core of what am I doing here? We all have to answer that in order to get anywhere, in processing this bill, debating this bill. And I hear you, Mr. Carlos, that conflict, it's a huge issue. It is, and I challenge anyone to tell me that that's something of the past, that it's something we don't have to worry about. It's one of the biggest reasons people don't trust the government of Guam. I believe that. I believe that, you know, they're always thinking there's some conflict, that we're in here, you know, to help our own families. So I think that we always have to do what we can to prevent that, right? We have to structure our institutions that are so powerful to prevent that. And Mr. Leon, especially your point about expanding the people that serve, absolutely. I completely agree. I think the more broad and more diverse, of course it's better. Of course it's better if we are going to debate things. And so much of what each of you has said to me is I agree with it all. But I don't necessarily agree that part-time is the way to get those things. And one of the statements that you made in your testimony, Senator Limtiaco, and I really respect everything that you've said, but there's one statement here that says, especially when these decisions involve financing and appropriating government resources, I believe these decisions are made without considering the impact of the next election. It would benefit our legislature and our community. That's a huge challenge for anybody in any position of the government of Guam. I would venture even directors whom are not elected worry about this kind of thing, unfortunately. And I have to say, I mean, so all of these concerns and more. I have an entire list. I feel like I could go on for days, you know, debating this. But let me just share with you my experience. My experience is, you know, we could have expert staff, and we've got agencies who are experts. They really are. They're supposed to be the experts in everything the government does. We're supposed to be able to call on them and get their expertise. That is extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult because sometimes they're blocked, sometimes we're blocked. It's puzzling, it's troubling. As a lawyer, I practiced law for 27 years. I was frustrated as a lawyer because sometimes the only way to get information is FOIA. It's a difficult, cumbersome process. I really believed as a senator, I'm going to be able to get that information quick, and it's my goal. I mean, I am here because I can get the information faster. You can get to the solutions faster, I'm hoping, right? But don't let anybody tell you, I mean, nobody's going to convince me that I could do this part-time, because there's absolutely, I feel every day this huge responsibility, not just to pick one item on on the list of things that Guam needs and concentrate on that one item. I don't feel like that's justice for Guam. And some senators have been very successful at doing that, and Guam has, really benefited from that. I mean, particularly in the days of the 21 legislature, that's a big benefit of a 21-seat legislature. We can pick one item, go for that, and there's enough people to cover, the very important items, perhaps. But the way it is now, I feel responsible to be a financial expert, a legal expert, a crime expert, a waterworks expert. Everything that the people are crying for, I feel responsible for, and I could never do it. And the difference sometimes, and I think about this a lot because, I have staff that I think is very, very good. The difference between my staff and me is it's not my staff's job to get out there and listen to everybody. That's my job. I feel very much that it's my job to get out, to sit here for hours sometimes. And I do it as much as I can. I think I've missed, when my daughter was graduating, I had to go to her graduation, and this morning I had to go to district court, and there are times, of course, I just can't make it, but some other conflict. But otherwise, I feel like this is my job. And this evolution that you described, I am all for that. I do feel there's an evolution because I've seen the legislature for many years, but I want much, much more. I feel like if we're really going to solve problems, we need more time. We need more discussion, absolutely more. We need more listening. We need more experts. We need more of everything, not less. I feel like sometimes it's very restricting when we hear a bill And we're going to get, we're going to hear from, for example, the three of you. And this is our opportunity. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 5 senators. That's what really frustrates me, I want to hear from everybody, and I want everybody to hear from everybody, and I want the experts to come in here and give me everything they've got so that we can make an informed decision. I feel like we have to become experts. We really do. Cannot become, total experts, but that's the balance, I think, that comes with this job that's different than being the director of one agency or being, even a dedicated staff of the legislature. You're going to become experts in certain things, but certainly it's not your job to go out there and listen to everybody. It's not your job to balance. And that's the difference between one agency and a legislature, right? And we've seen it. We've got some, CCU says, why not do like the CCU? Well, the CCU is concentrating on certain things, and they've got expertise. They've got, huge agencies. They're able to give raises to their people so that they can, the theory is so they can get more expertise. Everything dedicated to that decision maker to make, that one decision. And I don't know, for me here, I just feel like I want the entire government of Guam also I want to feel like that we've got the resources of the government of Guam and the people of Guam, who I believe are so smart, to come in here and inform us as best we can. And we have got to work hard to balance. It's really very hard. I've been to so many hearings where the testimony's not balanced. I've had to do my own investigation, I feel like. And I know, Mr. Langura, you do your own investigations. But I've got to give a lot of credit to senators, because I feel like, senators that I've watched over the years, so many of the things that we have found in the government of Guam, we owe to them, because they were diligent, they looked for things, they gave us opportunities to flesh these things out. We have if they're, really diligent, they're going to have oversight hearings when there's something questionable, or they're going to have meetings at the very least, right, and flesh it out. But I don't know. That's why I feel like we need so much more time. We need, more people perhaps, but really I just feel like we just need to dedicate ourselves to it. It takes dedication beyond, I have to say, even for me, I had to raise my kids while I was a professional, I was a lawyer, and I thought I was really working the most I could work. But I have to say that in this capacity, it just blows my mind how much work I can actually do. And I have to, but I love it, because I just don't want to be irresponsible either. So I could read all day long, but I feel like that's not balance unless I get out there and I hear what everybody has to say. And you have to be in touch with, I'm sorry if I'm going on, but I just feel it, because this bill is it's a big deal. It really, really is. It's the crux of, do you want us to sit in here 30 days a year? You think we're going to hold any governor on Guam accountable 30 days a year? I can't imagine that. And I can't imagine that we don't have bad laws. I don't care how many bills that are put in, it doesn't bother me. As long as we get some good ones, and we've got some very good laws. My problem is these laws are not enforced. These laws, they don't follow them. And sometimes it's the legislature that has to call them on that, and I want my colleagues to call everybody on that. I don't want to feel completely responsible. I want as many people as possible to call people on it, to get that checks and balances. I just feel like I do not, that's my first reaction to this bill is, we cannot be dreaming of lessening checks and balances. We've got to increase that in any way possible. And so I like all of your, testimony, all of your suggestions, but I really just feel like, we've got to balance that. I'm going to continue to think about it, but my initial reaction is, I need more time, less sleep, and that's what we're also having to balance, that kind of thing, but I just feel like that's what we owe the people of Guam. not less. We owe them more. We've got boards and commissions who do the same thing, right? We can say a board, sometimes they don't have quorum, you know, and that's decision makers who are volunteers or limited, right? Part-time, I guess, is. We try to put some excellent people on boards, and we have excellent people on boards, but they're part-time. And so sometimes you'll see them go way above and beyond to dedicate themselves, you know, to that agency, but not always, and in fact, maybe not often, right? It's just the way, when you have a job, I don't want my staff distracted with outside hobbies, other jobs, third jobs, second jobs. I mean, it sounds nice, but in reality, I don't want it at all. I don't even want to think that they're thinking about anything else except how to solve these issues that we are facing. So I don't know, and but I hope we can continue to talk about it. And I don't know. So I just don't want to. I don't want the limits. I don't want any more limits. I think we have to open this stuff up and bring in as much as possible, much information as possible, much expertise as possible. We have to feel that we have to become experts. I sat through, I don't know how many legislatures, 20? No, 10? I don't know, 20 years, watching people vote on bills who I know for a fact did not read them. And no way do I want that. I don't want that. I want the opposite. I want them to read them. I want them to feel completely responsible for the results. That's the kind of expertise I want them to feel. And the kind of in touch with the people who are actually going to feel the impacts of it. You know, that's what we balance. That's right, Senator, that's what you had to do. And it's very, very hard. I agree. But I just say, hold them to it. Don't, you know, let them shirk from that. I just say, hold us to it. Hold senators to that. I think they should be held to that. I don't know. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, just real quick.
Yes, thank you.
I mean, this is what I ended my testimony with, right? Is that I'm here to testify to, one, to commend the two for introducing the bill, two, commend you for getting it to a public hearing, you know, three, you know, hopefully thank the Committee of Rules to get it to the floor, but lastly is for all of you to take it to the floor and debate your points and to argue where you stand and then vet it out and flesh it out. That's the one thing I miss most about being in the legislature was that process. So get it to the floor and talk about it.
Thank you very much, Senator, and I want to assure you that we'll work with the authors of this. If we need to have additional hearings or discussions on it, we'll do that. But, you know, we serve together, and that's always been my style, right? Or my philosophy is ensure that every bill gets before the body, and each member of the body debates it and has the opportunity to vote it up or down. So you can be rest assured of that. I'll ask the authors if any of them want to close.
Yes.
Senator Esteves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to echo the sentiment, well, hopefully if we're a part-time legislature, we might be able to get you to consider coming back. I thank you. I'd like to close, but I also like to comment on something is that, you know, I think even from the outside, I've seen instances where I think it was flagrant that there were instances where a senator, you can tell, didn't read a bill at all. And again, I always welcome the debate and the discussion on how we can improve this. But again, I would argue that even in a full-time capacity, you'll see senators not do any research at all. And with regards to conflicts of interest, I think we can try to dictate in detail all day long, but somebody who's true and pure is going to be somebody who's true and pure. And no matter how much, for an elected official at least, we try to force them to be good or force them to do the right thing, sometimes it might not always pan out that way. Again, you know, I mean, some of it is arguable what the right thing is, but I think the simple things is, you know, paying attention to what you do, holding your vote sacred and doing your research, not voting on something that you know is a direct conflict of interest. And then especially now that it becomes public where everyone would know it would be an obvious conflict of interest. The idea of the citizens' legislature in terms of a part-time capacity focuses on a couple of key points. One, that the central staff needs to be classified and professional staff is important. Because if every senator were to disappear right tomorrow, granted there might not be any new bills being written, the legislature will function. People will get paid. Bills will get researched. Legal will still do their portions. So I think it's important to understand that type of continuity